So, Cornelius, during this time when you were getting involved with racing, was betting a part of it?
Not really. I've always had a theory that people get into racing for one of three reasons. One is the love of the horse, and because they've been around horses all their lives. Well, that was definitely not me. Another reason is because people love a bet, and that again, a little tiny bit, but not really. I was probably not very good at it, was the good reason for that. Though I do remember, I have a clear memory of the first bet I ever had, which was at Chepstow, circa 1972-73. And the only reason I backed it was called Deblin's Green, won the Welsh Grand National, ridden by Nigel Wackley, who became a starter, and his son Rupert Wackley was a good jockey as well. And Deblin's Green was a village not very far from us, and I'd seen that, driven past quite a lot of times, and it said Deblin's Green down to the left-hand side. So I thought I definitely backed that on the tote. And I think probably early 70s, even if you were clearly underage, probably people weren't quite as strict about not taking bets as they are now. And I remember backing Churchtown Boy ridiculously to beat Red Rum. Actually, it was the Grand National, and this isn't a unique story, is it? But I definitely backed Churchtown Boy to beat Red Rum in 1977. He finished second. I remember I often used to go to the house of a friend on Grand National Day, whose father always fancied himself as a bit of a sort of one day a year bookmaker. And I said that I fancied a horse in the Grand National. In fact, I fancied two. I think one was, I think it was Lord Browndodd, who was a good old chaser that used to pop up at Aintree every year in the mid-70s, and the Pilgarlic, who must have run in the Grand National about 4 or 5 times. And I backed them both, and he said, these couldn't, the father of the friend said, these can't possibly win. And so he didn't back them, he just stuck the bets, he just laid them himself. And I have a feeling that the two of them were still bang there jumping the last, and he did gulp a little bit. Mid-70s, having to sort of shell out 50 quid would have been really quite a lot, but happily for him, Lord Browndodd and the Pilgarlic, they never won. They were always in the sort of first 5, 6, 7 in Grand Nationals. So yeah, a Grand National sort of person. And now I'm really happy to occasionally have a fiver on something, and if it wins and I win 20 quid, and it sounds a bit pathetic, but I thoroughly enjoy that. And I've got little hairs I've had hairs in horses and little bits of horses. And I think once we had a little bit of a touch one day, a couple of times had a little bit of a touch, but honestly, I had 20 quid on an 8-to-1 shot that won. Winning 160 pounds suited me very well indeed. It's just not a massive motivation.
Okay, so the motivation was it writing or broadcasting?
Well, broadcasting, but storytelling. It's, there are so many, we've mentioned a few horses already, the Pilgarlic, who turns up in every Grand National and practically always gets round and runs well, Red Rum, those kind of horses. And more recently, being able to tell the story of the horses, whether the horses that spring straight into my mind when I think that are horses like Lock Song, horses like Persian Punch in the 1990s. More recently, I don't know, the stories like Sir Percy winning a Derby, Yates winning all those Gold Cups, the Queen's Horse Estimate winning the Gold Cup, Royal Ascot, Corto Star, Denman. And so to be able to tell those type of stories, and for an audience, the audience I had when I was at the BBC wasn't a racing audience, it was an audience that liked a good story, hopefully. So be able to tell those stories, the story of the jockeys championships, the rise of Frankie Dettori, the rise of Oisin Murphy, the rise of AP McCoy, the Dunwoodies going right back, the Scudamores, all these kind of people, and the trainers and the owners. So there are so many good stories, and on the odd occasion they all come together. For example, I can't think of a better example than the Sussex Stakes of 2020, when Marcus Tregoning, a great character who's been in the wilderness for a bit, comes together with a good horse in Mahatha, owned by one of the big names, Sheikh Hamdan, etc. And then it's a thrilling horse race, and you don't very often get all those different elements at the same time. So to be able to tell those stories, and the broadcasting side of it, I just probably like the sound of my own voice. But the writing was something I had to do for the BBC, and so I just sort of learnt about roughly how to do it, and gradually sort of tried to polish things up.
Well, listening to anybody listening to this, your enthusiasm is infectious. So
I always people say that, which is kind, but I'm no cheerleader. I always used to think people said, "Oh, you're so enthusiastic," and I am enthusiastic about it. But when things are bad, and there are lots of examples in every walk of life, but certainly in horse racing, when things aren't good, when people aren't doing as well as perhaps I believe they should be doing, then I'm quite happy to have a little pop at them on those occasions. And those people who just constantly come up and say, on a really average day's racing, but it happens to be Ascot, and say, good racing. And you think, no, it's not good racing, it's rubbish racing. So that kind of that false enthusiasm I don't like. But I'm enthusiastic about the sport because there are lots of good stories to tell. It is exciting, it's not boring, and not enough people necessarily appreciate that.
Okay, even if you went to Eton, it wasn't that easy to get your toe in the door back in those days, I would imagine. So where did you get your break?
Well, certainly it was nothing to do with Eton, and nothing to do with it at all. It was to do with a drinking pal of my father's, to be honest. Chap was a director of, a family friend, who's a director of a little commercial radio station in Gloucester, called Seven Sound Radio. He said, I can't get you a job there, but I can get you an opportunity to meet the programme director, programme controller, who was good enough to, because commercial radio, well, probably all local radio, but particularly commercial radio in the 1980s worked like that. If somebody was enthusiastic enough to be prepared to come along for practically no money, then they could have some kind of a role. So I went along there. They said, do you want to come back? I said, I'd love to. And came back on a Monday in July. It was the week that Prince Charles and Princess Diana got married. Started there on the Monday. And I think for whatever reason, I was broadcasting practically by Tuesday afternoon, if not slightly quicker. And there were some great stories in Gloucestershire at the time. There was a spy at GCHQ in Cheltenham, which was a huge story at the time. Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, they all moved into the area at the time. And there were just lots of good stories. There was a really sad outbreak of meningitis in the area. There was a big immigration story involving a vicar from Gloucestershire and his wife from Russia. There were all sorts of good stories to tell, and I had an enormous amount of fun telling those stories to a relatively small audience. But from my point of view, the biggest break of being able to work at Seven Sound Radio in Gloucestershire was that Cheltenham Racecourse was on the doorstep, and no one particularly wanted. There were people who did a bit of sports reporting, but they wanted to do football, or they wanted to do rugby unions, big in that area, wanted to do Gloucestershire cricket probably, but nobody particularly wanted to go to the races. So I must have gone the end of that year to report on racing at Cheltenham for that radio station. The guy that ran Cheltenham was a guy called Edward Gillespie, who was definitely something of a mentor. I probably wasn't much of a protege, but he was definitely a mentor, and he knew of another job that had come up with an organisation called Race Call, which did that cutting edge thing at the time of putting racing commentaries on the telephone, which was 089, 0898 and 0891, and they all the telephone lines at the time, so we're late 80s, they all had the same prefix. So whether it was racing from Redcar or it was some porn line, they all started with the same 0898 or 0891. I think the 0891 was when they split, but certainly to start with, they all had the same kind of number. And if you were after racing at Redcar and your finger pressed one wrong button, you could end up with all sorts of excitements.
Now, you also, writing has been a big thing. It's like Run Parallels. You've written for several publications. I've just got a few. London
who've
Evening
you got?
Standard,
Yeah.
Horse and Hound, Sunday Mirror, The Times, The
Yeah.
Guardian. So it's a fairly eclectic mix, actually.
Well, they were, yeah, but none of them were sort of full time. The Horse and Hound was quite full time. Michael Seeley was a brilliant guy who was the racing correspondent of the Times and of the Horse and Hound, and he got very ill for a few years before he died. So I used to stand in, and then when he did sadly die, I was Audax in the Horse and Hound, so following the footsteps of Seeley and John Oaksey. So fairly big footprints to try and fill. Other things, I had a column in the Times for a bit. Yeah, that was because the late Alan Lee was the racing correspondent of the Times, and they decided, as well as having sort of straightforward reporting, they wanted to have a column of just sort of chat, and so he very kindly sorted me out for that, Alan. So I did that for a few years. The Guardian, again, I did a few comment. I think I bigged my CV. Whichever part of the internet you found, I've been bigging up my my CV rather dramatically here. But the Times was quite big. The Horse and Hound was quite big. Standard, I used to stand in for Christopher Poole, who was the legendary racing correspondent of the Standard, who was an enormous character in every sense of the word. He was a big fella, but he had a big personality as well. Sunday Mirror I did for a year. That was a good fun year, because that was an opportunity to do exactly what I'm just saying to you, to tell some stories and to really bring people to life, bring the sport to life in a pretty significant Sunday newspaper for a period of time.
Okay, so when was the first year you got the coveted RCA press badge?
Early 90s sometime. I think initially it was actually the coveted RCA badge for a few years. And I think the BBC had just always had RCA badges rather than the press badge. I remember when we switched over, because the almost the most important condition of the media recognition from the RCA is that when you retire, you can get a retired person's equivalent, which means basically you can go to the races for nothing. And when I switched from an RCA badge after quite a long time to the press badge, as they call it, my first call was Caroline Davis at the RCA. Can I just confirm that you don't, because I think you had to have served a certain length of time with a badge. So I said, if I find myself retiring after only a few years with the press badge, I can still have the retirement badge, can't I? Which fortunately, they said I could. I haven't retired, so it hasn't. That hasn't come about. But I joined the BBC in 1990. Peter Bromley was the racing commentator and correspondent, but he wanted to just concentrate on commentaries. So I did quite a lot more reporting, and we did. In terms of the level of racing on BBC Radio, which I always did BBC Radio, not TV. There was plenty of stuff on there so I started August 1990 and I left April 2020. And throughout that period, there was a lot of stuff on. It became increasingly hard to get stuff on, but there was plenty of stuff on over that time. Broke a few stories, not that many, but broke a few. Was able to go to it's 5 Live news and sport audience. So not a racing audience, but a much more general audience with, some interesting stories, bit of storytelling along the way, and hopefully that just the best thing when I left the BBC, the amount of people who said no interest in racing, never been interested in racing, but I really enjoyed listening to your stuff on the radio, which was the biggest compliment that anyone could possibly have paid.